Okay, well, good morning. We are in the book of Mark, and this is our devotional time for Christ Central Church. And if you're coming from anywhere outside of the UK or anywhere outside of the church, you're very welcome to join us this morning. And we're in Mark's Gospel in chapter 5. I'm Alistair Semple, just one of the group members here. And I have a treat for you in Mark's Gospel. There are four Gospels, which you find in the New Testament. Three of them are very similar. Some people wonder why there's three. Well, they take different slants. The fourth one gives an additional set of all sorts of different information. But the three that are very similar all share most of the stories in them. And it's reckoned that the earliest of the three that was written down was Mark's Gospel, the one that we're in. It's the shortest Gospel. There are certain things which it doesn't include. And normally, you sort of get the brief version of whatever the stories are in Mark's Gospel, and then Matthew and Luke give a longer version of the same story with more detail. There are very few exceptions to this, but we're in one of them this morning. So Matthew, if we were doing this from Matthew's Gospel this morning, we would only have 6 verses to look at. If we were doing it in Luke's Gospel, we'd only have 9 verses to look at. But in Mark's Gospel, there are 20 verses. So this is an unusual one for a number of reasons. But I'm going to read you. Normally I put this up in words, but I'm going to read it to you this morning, and I'm reading from the New International Version of the Bible. So you can listen as I read. They went across the lake in the boat, which, if you were with us yesterday, had been involved in a surprising storm that nearly sank the thing and left everyone frightened until Jesus stood up, or was woken up because he was asleep in the back of the boat, and calmed the storm, and it just stopped. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes, which is on the other side. This is the non-Israelite side. This is the Gentile side. This is the side which would be considered unclean if you were Jewish, and all the people in the boat were Jewish. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tomb, so it arrived very close to a graveyard. From the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. It would appear that we would have suggested that this was a man who was mad. This is a sort of man that children are warned to stay away from, behaving oddly, frightening, actually, to the point that the locals would have tied him up at different points to stop him frightening them. Well, he was too strong to be tied, too dangerous to go near, and even on the occasions where they had chained him, he'd found ways of breaking those chains. So this man was not a man to be messed with, and he comes to chain him, to not quite greet Jesus, but let's see what happens. For he'd often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out, and he would cut himself with stones. This is, if you've heard that phrase, self-harming. This was a man so frustrated, in such agony and such pain, that the only thing he could think to do at points to try and stop what would appear to be lots of voices in his head was to cause him his own self-pain. So he didn't just terrify other people. He was probably in deep, deep distress himself. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and then fell on his knees in front of him. And he shouted at the top of his voice. Now, this is a strong man, probably unknown to all the people who were then watching him, including Jesus. Likely to be extremely hairy, likely to be very dirty. You know, this is a frightening scene, running full tilt, and then instead of crashing into them, lands on his knees in front of Jesus. And he shouts at the top of his voice, which is intimidating all by itself, "What do you want with me? Jesus, Son of the Most High God, in God's name, don't torture me. Wow. That's kind of like going from an amble through the park sightseeing through to full-on crisis in sort of no time flat. I mean, it's like suddenly being jumped out in front of by a person wielding a knife saying, I want your money and your phone. I mean, this is sort of absolute shock territory. Even if he's on his knees, you can imagine that all the people are taken aback. But in verse 8 we get, for Jesus had said to him, come out of this man, you impure spirit. And so we find here for the first point that this man is spiritually oppressed. He's actually has spirits in him that aren't his own spirit. There's something else going on. There is very much a realm of the spirits, and there are evil spirits. And this man is a place where a number of them have come, because when he's asked his name, he says, my name is Legion, for we are many. And then he begged Jesus again and again not to send him out of the area. So many things we could make about this. So deliberately pausing. A legion in Roman times was a sort of a self-contained unit of the army comprising about, between 5,000 and 6,000 men. This is not literally meaning necessarily that there are 5,600, which is the sort of standard number, different evil spirits in this man, but this is a guy who's saying, there's so much going on here. I mean, there's a large herd of pigs, and I'm again reading, and it was feeding on a nearby hillside, and the demons begged Jesus, send us out among the pigs, allow us to go into them, and he gave them permission. And the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. A herd of about 2,000 in number rushed down a steep bank and into the lake, where they were drowned. Those tending the pigs, pig herders, locals, ran off and reported this in the town and the countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they saw the man who'd been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there dressed in his right mind. And they were afraid. I mean, the word underneath it is they were petrified. And for all sorts of reasons. Apart from anything else, as far as they were concerned, the livelihood of perhaps the town, 2,000 pigs, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of produce. That's a lot of things. And that's suddenly gone. I mean, the best they might be able to do is rescue bodies from the lake and use those, but they're not going to produce any new pigs. Those who had seen it and told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, they told about the pigs as well. And when the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region, I mean, it wasn't, wow, this is amazing. Look at this incredible healing. Look at what this man can do. It's, we don't know how to cope with you. You have really frightened us. Go away. Please go away. Final part in the reading, back to Mark 5, verse 18. As Jesus was getting back into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, go to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis, which is the region with 10 cities in it, how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed. Well, it's a long passage. There's not really the time since on my clock. I've got a minute left. before we break into groups to pray. Mark gives more time to this than the other two parallel gospel writers. He has a theme that runs through his gospel. And the theme that runs through this gospel is an unusual one. The theme is terror. Yesterday, when we were hearing about the storm and Jesus calming the storm, it says that the people in the boat, the disciples, they were terrified. They thought they were going to die. But it doesn't mention that they were terrified when they were in the storm, when they thought they were going to die. It says that they were terrified after Jesus had stood up and said, "Peace, be still." And the wind dropped and the waves stopped and it was calm. And it says, and they were terrified. Who is this man? This was not a, wow, Jesus, you're amazing, though awe would have been in them. This is, who are we with? And that's the same thing from the group today. Who is this? We can't cope with this. This is too frightening. And as an aside, and it's worth just mentioning it, the first person who is charged with telling people about Jesus isn't the 12, not in Mark's gospel. It's a Gentile. It's a man who was demon-possessed. And he's sent not to the children of Israel. He's sent to the 10 cities of Gentiles in the Decapolis. This is our first missionary from Mark's gospel. And that should be telling you something. Mark's gospel is a gospel to upset people. It's to make them uncomfortable. It's to make them question whether they know anything about Jesus. What do they know? They've got to deal with a man like this. They've got to come to some sort of conclusion. They can't just think, gosh, what a great teacher. Aren't they amazing miracles? This is a man that you can't walk away from. You can't just be neutral about. This is a man who polarizes people, because either this is a man you entrust your entire life to, and that might be quite an uncertain ride, or this is a man you ask to leave. Yesterday, it was a storm of the elements on the outside. Today, it was a storm on the inside, and Jesus is master of both. We're going to go and pray now. But if you're here thinking, what am I meant to do with that this morning? Then that's the impact that this gospel is meant to have. And that's why it's written this way.